Okay, Richard's got a first question here.
Ah, okay. I recognize those.
Yeah, can you see this picture?
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so I found this as a cover for another book about a guy that had gone through the Monroe Institute. And I remember in your first books you had talked about that disc-shaped thing
Yep.
with words from it. So is this sort of similar to what you were seeing? Do you see correlation between this and what you experienced?
Yes, I see in that image, I see the same information presented in a slightly different image, but I see the same information. What I see are individual human beings here on Earth connected directly to something that I'll call higher self, you might call greater self, whatever you call it. And I also see something that I didn't see the first time I saw the image that I saw. There's a connection on the other side of that disc going up somewhere. Within the image, it doesn't really show a lot about where that goes, but in the fourth book I've written, Curiosity's Father, it talks about where those go. Yep, it's the same information.
Good.
Can one of you guys explain to everybody here what that picture represents, what the images represent?
Well, let me do it this way. This is the image on the guidebook.
Yeah.
And
You can pass that
you
around.
can see that there's a representation of a disc shape. This is not exactly what it looked like to me. This is just an artist's rendering. But it shows an individual human being connected by something to a much larger thing, a disc. I guess if I were going to try to talk about what that image means to me, I would say that part of what I discovered about where was I before I was here has to do with where I came from. Because it turns out once you begin to explore questions like that, you begin to discover that you have access to far more information than you really knew was available. I mean, Robert Monroe's affirmation, I am more than my physical body. His affirmation begins that way. And I had no idea how much more than my physical body I am. I would say that in my image, it was a disc with little lights going around in concentric circles, and that represented a higher self. And each one of those circles represented what you might call a permanent member of the higher self, someone who exists there as their sort of home. And that where I came from was the higher self said, you know, there's some areas of human existence we really have, sure we've not discovered. There's still some unknowns about being human. How about if we take a little bit of this part of the higher self and a little bit of that part of the higher self and a few more parts, we could call them personality traits, and let's bundle them all together into a self-aware being, and then let's launch that self-aware being into a cycle of lifetimes in physical reality on planet Earth as a human. That's where I came from as far as I'm concerned. Everything that I do, everything that I see, everything that I experience, everything that I come to know is known directly through me to my higher self. It's difficult to describe me and higher self because there really is no separation between me and higher self, except that I believe there is. I believe I am this body.
You're the goal.
So for me, that higher self is the place that is where I came from. It's where I was created. And I continue to cycle through lifetime after lifetime until I have explored everything my personality traits draw me to or repulse me from, until all the information I can gather is gathered from the perspective of me as a small portion, as an aspect of my higher self. And then at some point, it's kind of like, well, we've kind of used this one as much as we can use him. Every time he goes out, he comes back with exactly the same information. There's nothing new here. Congratulations, you are now a permanent member of the higher self. I hope that wasn't too confusing. But
I have a question for on the diagram that Richard just showed.
Mm-hmm.
The big blob would be representative of the higher self. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And each of those big white lines that came down connected to an individual looking human being were what I perceived as connection to my higher self, connected to me. So, as I said before, Richard, the imagery is a little different, but it's exactly the same information as far as I'm concerned. Which is as it should be. Each of us has our own way of perceiving. Each of us perceives in a way that's unique to our previous memories, our previous experience, what we previously encountered. And so my image of it's a little different than that one. But yeah, that's a higher self image to me. Connections to individual humans. And it showed a connection from that higher self that was going up. That going up became the fourth book, Voyage to Curiosity's father, because a friend of mine and I, Denise, who's a psychotherapist in Reno, Nevada, we started doing some explorations of the evolution of consciousness and discovered that my higher self is actually connected to something you could call its higher self, which is connected to something called its higher self. Each of these living in an ever-expanding perspective. And if I spend too much time on one question, I won't get to very many of them. So I'm going to stop there and say, is there more you want to hear about that or something else?
What do you got to say, Richard? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good with that. That's part of, I was fascinated that two different individuals come up with essentially the same thing, just slight modifications of it. And,
I don't recall where, but I've also seen other images that people have created that are not exactly identical, but I see the same message. Sometimes people will describe something like a mushroom. They'll describe a huge mushroom cap that with a stem that leads out and is connected to a person. There are a lot of different images that are similar.
Yeah,
that one's pretty close, though.
Yeah, so it sort of confirms to me that there's something really interesting going on here.
Yeah, there's something there. There's something there.